Okay, I've been waiting to do this episode for a while now. I'm glad we finally got to it. So I got a couple questions for you. Does your WordPress dashboard take several seconds to load every time you log in? That usually means your hosting plan doesn't have enough memory or processing power for everything you installed. Your front end speed, what your visitors see, depends on those same server resources, along with a caching plan that actually works and DNS that resolves quickly. Visitors feel that weakness when your site is sluggish, even without really giving it a name in their head. A sluggish site drives them away. Search engines penalize slow sites too. It costs you in ranking, not just visitors. Have you had any security scares, like malware on the site, a plugin that got hacked, or maybe did your host lock the account with a warning? None of that points to a problem with WordPress itself. It points to a site that grew piecemeal, one plugin and one decision at a time, without an architectural plan behind any of it. So in this episode, we're going to show you exactly where that shows up as weakness. Hi, I'm William Beam. I went out into business on my own and did what most business owners do. I picked up tools one at a time and found that the bill kept climbing. I still did the work by hand that I'd already paid tools to do. Well, the truth is I spent years building systems at places like Lockheed Martin and PwC. I just wasn't using that skill set on my own business. So that's what I do now as principal architect for Suburbia Press, and that's what this show teaches you. Now, I see a lot of complaints on LinkedIn and Reddit. People blame WordPress for problems on their own site. That conclusion is wrong, and I'll show you where the real weaknesses actually are. Now, in the last episode, I answered whether owning your software was actually more work than renting it. And if you're new here, take a look at episode 1. It breaks down the 5 questions this show runs on. I call it the capability framework. All right, you're planning on building a new website. You're going to use WordPress. Here's what you need to think about with architecture. You wouldn't erect a building without a blueprint. A contractor doesn't pour a foundation and hope the plumbing fits later. A WordPress site often grows without one. You haven't done the architecture in advance, so you just kind of add a plugin to fix one problem. Later, you add another plugin for a different problem. Each choice kind of makes sense by itself. Nothing forces you to ask what those choices do together. Some months pass. The dashboard slows down. Pages take longer to load for visitors. Then some kind of scare hits you, the kind that you may already recognize. Maybe it's malware, maybe it's something else. But at that point, WordPress gets the blame. The real weakness built up one plugin at a time. Nobody was watching for it. Now, there are some business owners that take that blame seriously enough to act on it. I have seen people on LinkedIn and on Reddit say, I'm going to rebuild my site in React. So I'm getting rid of WordPress and all these other problems. And it's always the same thing. They blame WordPress. They never stop to think about the architecture. And if they go ahead and do something else, they're going to spend months rebuilding the entire site on a different platform. And the new site launches, and it still slows down under traffic spike. So here's why. WordPress was never the problem. The platform changed, but the pattern that created the weakness did not. And another thing, if you're going to rebuild everything in React, that means you can't change things easily. WordPress is a content management system. React means that every change requires a developer to go in and write new code. That doesn't happen with WordPress. Okay, so most of the sites people blame WordPress for grew the same way. Someone added a plugin at a time. Someone reached for one quick fix after another. Nobody ran it through the capability framework that I'm about to show you here. It's not a WordPress failure. That's a site that grew without asking the 5 questions that I'm showing you here. And here's what that looks like on a real site. Before I install a single plugin, I run it through the same 5 questions from episode 1. Does this layer fit how the rest of the site actually works? Does combining this layer with others create real strength, or does it just create risk? Can this layer survive a spike in traffic, a migration, or a growth? Basically, you want to keep your continuity growing. If this layer fails, does the damage stay contained, or does it reach into everything else? And does separating this layer make every other layer stronger, or does it make mixing it in make everything weaker? All right, let's take a look at my own site. All right, so this is Suburbia Press, and there's really 2 sites here. So this first page is the blog. I've got my articles over here, and a visitor kind of loads this page, The server serves the same content over and over again. Caching handles most of the load without much strain. And that's kind of what your marketing site does. Your blog site has different needs than if you come over here to this site. On the back end, this is where I've got my community. But it's not just a community. Let me come down here and click this and show you. So this is the back end. And because I use the Fluent Hub tool, this is part of the Fluent ecosystem from WP Managed Ninja. I can come over here and take a look at all of my stuff, all of my business tools. They're running on a different server than what my blog site is doing. I've got my forums, my support tickets, my projects. I mean, I even use these projects for this one, Suburbia Press YouTube pipeline. This is where I actually handle what I'm doing. So this episode we're doing, I'm done with the scripting. It's actually now in the filming or recording stage. So I've got all of my tools in one place, but I've got them on a different server for different reasons. They handle different tools and they require different resources. Fluent CRM writes a new contract. Fluent Cart processes a transaction. Fluent Boards updates a task. Each of those writes to a database. A database costs more than serving a cached page. That's what I mean by it needs some resources. You put both jobs on the same limited resources, a spike in one, and then it drags down the other. That's not a WordPress problem. That's a continuity and control problem that nobody planned for. That's why your dashboard slows down sometimes in WordPress. The hosting plan doesn't have enough memory or CPU or resources or configuration for what's installed on it. That's why pages load slowly for visitors too. The same server resources working against the front end along with weak caching and slow DNS. And that's why a security scare hits harder than it should. One weak plugin can reach every other layer because nothing ever separated them. When I talk about a weak plugin, there are times when plugins have security problems that allow an attacker to gain access, which is why security is never a destination. It's always a journey. You always have to be looking for your latest updates and keeping software updated as there are new releases that address security problems. So let me show you a little bit deeper. So I showed you some of my tools back in here, but what am I doing to really architect all of this? First off, I'm planning what I want. I started this site with just a blog. It was purely to do affiliate marketing. I did not have a bunch of other tools. I was actually using SaaS services like many people do. I used ConvertKit, which is now kit.com, for my email marketing. I used ThriveCart, and I've started off with different plugins on different sites for BuddyBoss and LearnDash. So I've gone through the gamut of them. That experience really showed me what a lack of architecture will do. And it's embarrassing because the stuff that I've done for my career was all about architecture. It was all about planning. What happens if I do this, if I do that? Will this software work with that software, or will it create a conflict? And that's what I really see in these messages on LinkedIn and Reddit. When people are talking about what's working and what's not, and they're blaming WordPress, it's really not WordPress. WordPress is quite simply an operating system for your business tools. So what I've done is I've separated things. You can see this is my hosting. I use a host called xCloud. It is a virtual private server host, and it does more than WordPress, but I'm using it specifically for WordPress. If you've used something like WP Engine, which I previously used, or you've used HostGator, or you've used Kinsta, those are what you would call shared servers. In other words, you're on the same server with a lot of other sites, and when they have a problem, you have a problem. They consume more resources. That means there are fewer resources for you. When you're using a virtual private server, a VPS, then you have dedicated resources. So let me show you what I'm talking about. All right, so this server that we're on, you can see I've got my name for the server up here, and then you can see a number of sites. This is what I use for my various websites, all WordPress websites. So I've got some that are demo sites. I've got some, for my wife and her running. I've got sites for my photography and a few other things. So Suburbia Press, Suburbia Labs, and there are more as well. All of those websites are just blogs. They're not running any business tools. So why did I choose this server? Well, let me show you the resources. On this one, you can see that my RAM size is 4 gigabytes. I have 2 CPUs. I've got 128 gigs of storage space over here, and it costs me $21.60 per month. That's probably more than, if you're just running like 1, maybe 2 blogs, you wouldn't even need that much. You could get a smaller one for less money. And take a look, $21.60 a month, that's less than you would pay on WP Engine, which is supposed to have all this great service for you. No, it really sucks. I know, because I was a customer for a while. And I've also migrated some of my clients off of WP Engine onto virtual private servers on xCloud. And you've got a choice of different types of servers, but let's not go too far down the rabbit hole. Another thing I want to look at is the database. So we have a number of utilities down here. The database, you can see there's MySQL. You pretty much have 2 options. You can run MySQL or you can run MariaDB. On most of my sites, I kind of like MariaDB. On this one, I chose MySQL. MySQL is very well known. If you've ever worked with an Oracle system, it's kind of the same kind of command structure. And down here, there's another one called Redis. Redis is a caching tool that works with the database and in your internal site structure. So in other words, it's not caching the data that's on the front of your site like you would have typically for your blog. On this one, I use something that works with the server. So this OLS that I have up here in the name, well, that stands for Open Lightspeed. That's the server that I'm using on this particular host. So that is the web software. Open Lightspeed comes with a free caching software that integrates with the web server software. And it works much better than anything I've ever tried before. I used to use WP Rocket all the time. Well, WP Rocket has gotten progressively more expensive and more difficult to use. It's not really doing as well. I started putting my marketing sites, my blogs, on this server with Open Lightspeed and putting on the Lightspeed cache, which, as I said, was free. And it's running rings around what I ever got on WP Rocket. So this is what I talk about with architecture. You want to match the task or responsibility of the sites with the server, the web server, and the resources that you're going to put in place. Now, why don't I run everything on Open Lightspeed? Well, that's simply, again, because of caching. I don't need or want to have a caching thing for the front end on some of those business tools that we looked at. So let me show you again what I looked at over here. And you can see my CRM, that's Fluent CRM, Fluent Cart. I've got Fluent Forms, Fluent Support, Fluent Boards, and a number of other things over here. If you're looking at Fluent Community, which is kind of something that I have down here, and somebody logs in, or the same thing with Fluent Cart, somebody puts something in their shopping cart, you don't want to have that cached for the browser, because the person who puts something in their cart and that stays in the cache, then the next person who comes along may see that. That's kind of private information. You do not want to cache those things because it is just simply going to cause problems with showing data that another person has done on your experience on the site. So that's why I don't run on this one. This one's running on a different web server, but that's why I don't run Open Lightspeed for this particular server. I run it for this one and these sites, the web and marketing sites. So that's really part of what you want to look at. And look, there are a ton of things that we can go over here. I'm not going to do it on this lesson or it'll take forever. But let me show you another server. On this server, I've got different production sites. You can see where I've got hub.suburbiapress.com. Well, that is essentially this site, hub.suburbiapress.com. That's where I install all of my business tools. That's where I install my community. Now, there's some advantages to that. First off, these tools work together. If they're on the same server, they update the same database. They don't update the same tables directly unless there is a need to do. So there are some integrations. But what that means is I don't have to rely on a tool like Zapier or Make when, for example, my Fluent CRM has an automation that has a trigger. Maybe it comes from the board. So for example, if I click something over here in this board as far as what I'm doing, maybe I complete a task, that could send a trigger to Fluent CRM, which could kick off an automation. And then all these tools are working together. When somebody buys a product, in my Fluent cart. That can also be a trigger to Fluent CRM to send them emails to update their status as a contact. And I don't want to click into those because I have live customers in there and I don't want to show their information too much. But the idea is these things are integrated on purpose. They were written by the same development company. They were designed and architected to go ahead and work together. And you don't have to worry about paying extra money for every little task that happens to Zapier or Make because it's all happening on the server. And it's also happening much faster because there is no latency from transferring from my server to Zapier's server to another tool's server like ThriveCart, for example, and then back again to ConvertKit or kit.com. All of those little transactions cost you money and they delay you in time. This is so much faster than what I used to do. And that's why I really love working with this stuff. So let's go back to the server itself. So if we look at the settings for this one, I've got it beefed up a bit more. You can see here where it says NGINX. That is also a web server. So OLS is Open Lightspeed. That's what I'm using for my marketing and blog sites. Nginx is what I use to do work. And it doesn't have a caching tool that works with it like the Lightspeed cache does with Open Lightspeed, but I don't need it and I don't want it for running my business tools. So I've got more RAM. I've got 8 gigs of RAM. I've got 3 CPUs. I've got 256 gigs of storage space. And this one cost me $43.20 a month. And you can see here I'm running MariaDB rather than the MySQL. I've got different PHP servers. Now, when you're working on something with shared hosting, you don't know what your resources are. You don't know, unless you put caching as a plugin on your site, you don't know if it has Redis underneath it or not. You don't know how many PHP workers you have. You don't know how much RAM you have or how many CPU cores. And let's face it, for most of those shared hosting services like WP Engine or Kinsta, you're not even getting a full CPU. You're getting a fractional CPU based on demand of the overall server and the many other sites that are on there. So you're not getting dedicated resources. Here, with a virtual private server, I'm getting dedicated resources. Think about it this way. If you've ever worked in a restaurant, they don't like to work with electric stoves. They like to work with gas. And the reason is simple. Electric power fluctuates during the day. My wife talks to me about this all the time. She's cooking breakfast on one day and the burners are really hot. She cooks on the next day and there's hardly any power at all. When you're working with gas and flames, you have a consistent flow of powers. That's a good utility for cooking. Well, that's what having dedicated resources does for your site. You have a consistent flow of what you put on the server. You're in complete control. You're not getting hammered by what's happening on somebody else's site because the only sites on this server are yours. So that's a quick look at what I've done on xCloud. Now I've got one other server on here. That is a development server. So basically when I go on to go play and I don't want to break something on my production sites, I've got a development server on there. It's got fewer resources because I don't need as much for a developer. What I call this is a dual stack architecture. My marketing and blog sites are on the Open Lightspeed server. My tools, business tools, are on the Nginx server, and I give that more resources. So for example, Fluent Community, the minimum resources recommended by the vendor are 4 gigs of RAM and 2 CPUs. So I can't put that on an underpowered site. And one of the reasons I elevated this, I started with a 4 gigabyte server with 2 CPUs, and I upgraded because I was getting more traction and more business. And also you could see that I was putting more plugins on the site. Now, it's not killing me though. Let me show you something else. This is the monitoring for the Suburbia Press business site where I've got the community and all those other tools. So I'm not using all my RAM. I've got plenty of space available. I'm not killing my CPU and I'm barely touching my hard disk utilization. So I've got my uptime. It's been a week and 4 days since I last rebooted this. But take a look down here. This little green line, that's my RAM usage. I'm hardly touching the RAM that I have on here. I've got 8 gigs of RAM. But my CPU spike is right here. I've got a spike of 53%. But for the most part, I'm not having big problems. That was the last 24 hours. Let's take a look at the last 7 days. And this is what I really want you to pay attention to. There are going to be peaks and valleys with your resources. So why does the CPU spike there? Well, remember, I've got my CRM here. When I do my email marketing, it's sending from here. And I send that off to a service that then delivers it to people. But it takes resources in order to push that email out. So depending on what I'm doing when I'm sending emails, that may be a spike. If I'm doing something that's taking a lot of activity out in the community or some of the other tools, if I'm installing software, those are things that are going to kind of cause peaks with your CPU utilization. So my baseline is pretty consistent down here, but the peaks, you never know where they're going to get. This one in the last 70 days got up to 71%, and it didn't last very long. It came down. So that gives us a little bit of information about what size server I need. So that's how I'm looking at my server resources. I'm looking at the statistics over time and saying, am I getting peaks that are staying up there? So if these peaks were staying up there for a long time, that tells me it's never recovering and something is consuming too many server resources, whether it's my RAM or my CPU usage. And of course, my hard disk utilization, as I said, is very low for what this server comes with. You don't get this with shared hosting. This is xCloud. I recommend it. I'm going to have an affiliate link in the description below, and I'm also going to put something on the screen here in case you want to check them out. Again, an affiliate link, that means I get a small commission. It doesn't cost you anything else. But here's what we're looking at. The hosting for the blog environment and the business tools side by side in xCloud. This is where everything lives. You can do something on the same host if you're not going to drag around too much on others. So let me give you an example of that. So this site is Beam Systems. I'm actually still building some of this out. This is for any consulting work that I do hands-on. So for a lot of people, they can't really afford to hire someone to do their work. Other people can. Depends on their business and how much revenue they're making and how big of a problem they've got. So for those people, I've got plans that I can help them with their review, their planning, implementation, or if they need a fractional CTO. A lot of small businesses just can't afford to hire a full-time IT director or a chief technical officer. And I put this site together. I'm not planning on doing a lot of blogging on here, so I'm not looking for that kind of traffic. What I have on the back end of this is the same thing I have on the back end over here. I put in my CRM. I put in Fluent Cart because that's what will sell those services. And same thing with support tickets and projects. I'm not doing a community over there, but because I'm not doing much blogging or marketing there, I won't have that kind of drag. I'm not trying to hit it for SEO. This site, I decided I don't need to separate. I just put it all on one place. That, again, is part of the architecture. What is the primary purpose? Are there split purposes? And use that information to determine what kind of host do you need. So that's pretty simple. So basically, the idea of this separation comes from running a site through those 5 questions before any tool got installed. It didn't come from luck. It came from experience and knowing what I wanted as the purpose for each of those sites as to whether I separated them or whether I did not. Now, let me show you what discipline looks like when a vendor does it well. We take a look at this article on the FluentSnippets website. Now, FluentSnippets is a free plugin. It allows you to put code that you run inside of your WordPress site. The CEO of WP Managed Ninja, his name is Shahjahan Jewel. I hope I pronounced that right. I may have or may not. He pretty much goes by Jewel on his community. He made an architectural decision most vendors skip. So with FluentSnippets and with their other tools, he realized there was a problem. And this part of the article really says it out. FluentSnippets started as an objection. Said a few years ago, I went looking at the code snippet plugins in the WordPress directory. They all did the same thing. They stored your PHP in the database and have to evaluate it on every request. He says, I think that is the wrong design. Wrong for security, wrong for performance, wrong for anyone who has ever inherited a site and needs to know what the code actually runs on. The way he sees it, executable code belongs in files, where OP Cache can compile it and version control can see it. And he's got a full argument on another link. But this is the reason why his plugin works the way it does. This is architecture. He's not doing the same thing that all the other snippet tools are doing, because everybody who's learning how to develop on WordPress stuffs everything in the database. If you ever hear about bloat in the database, that's the reason why. And they're not just putting it in the same database. There's nothing wrong with that. They're, in many cases, putting it in the same tables. There is something wrong with that. When I look inside of my database, there are different tables for the different products that I've got from WP Ninja. So there's a different table for what I do with Fluent CRM, another different table, or more than one table for Fluent Cart, for Fluent Community, and on down the line. So the database can actually run much better without having one big bloated table. But as he said, this is also about performance and security. So those files compile once, and then the server caches that compile those version are available. So every additional site skips the extra database work that most plugins take on. And that decision paid off in a real migration. He moved 1,000 users to version 2 without breaking a single site. So this is kind of his argument of where he put it in. And he's got some other features that came in here. A lot of people like dark mode. He's redone the user interface. And I'll put a link to this article as well in the description below. But along the way, he closed a real permission check gap, a security fix on a live product. That's a vendor asking the same 5 questions this episode just walked through. He built it for continuity and control before a customer ever noticed the difference. As I said, FluentSnippets is free. There's no affiliate link here, no incentive on my end either way. I use it. I think it's a great tool. And this isn't a pitch for the plugin, but go read this article. You may find that you like this better than some of the other ones that you've been using. But what it is it's evidence of how a vendor thinks. And that is with architecture. What is the right way to do this? He does the same thing with the other plugins. He's got a very strong development team at WP Managed Ninja. It's a really strong signal. It's not a guarantee. Let's face it, there have been some plugins that occasionally had a compromise in them. They find it, they fix it quickly. No vendor anywhere is ever going to have a guaranteed product that will never have a security problem, because there are always people finding new ways to break into it. I've worked with enterprise operations, with Lucent Technologies, with Lockheed, with PwC, with BNY. I guarantee you every single one of those had a security incident, some more serious than others. There are supply side chain attacks where basically the vendor for a software tool gets infected by a vendor that they use to build that tool, and then it opens a back door. There's no guarantees. Security is a journey, not a destination. I use Cloudflare before anybody ever gets to my server. And to be honest, I'm using Cloudflare on the free plan. The only thing I have paid on there was when I used their storage for some of the stuff. But if we take a look, I've got several domains. They're all active. They're all using the free plan. And let's take a look down here at suburbiapress.com. I've got my DNS here. Now, Cloudflare DNS is very fast. If you're still using the DNS from the place where you bought your domain, let's say GoDaddy or Namecheap or something like that, this is faster, this is better. They run a lot more traffic and they block a lot more bad guys than any of those others do. If you can come down here to security, we'll take a quick overview. So you can do scans and you can see action items that are on here. But what I like to do is I've got a set of security rules that I put in place, and there's only 3 of them. This is what works before anybody ever gets to before they ever get to my site, because Cloudflare allows you to put a proxy between your domain name, in this case, suburbiapress.com, to the IP address that Cloudflare uses versus the IP address of your server. If people know the IP address of your server, they can go straight to it. There's nothing to stop them. But people typically only know your domain name, and then they don't know your IP address. So therefore, they have to go through this. So I've got 3 rules. The first one is to allow people that I want to get in. If they're known bots that I want to allow, verified bots, certain things that I've got in there, if I want them to come in, they can. They get a free pass. After that is the next rule. This one I call the Cloud Scraper block. Let me open this up. These numbers, the AS numbers, are really, boy, I'm trying to think of a good way to explain this. These numbers are for different hosting sites, different places. You can also have different countries. If you want to block something or allow it through, you can use these numbers. And that's what I've done basically with an incoming match or request matches something like this. Is it a known bot or not? Or is it a verified bot? I can make a determination of what I want to do. And I use what's called a managed challenge. You've probably seen this before. This is when you see just a little checkbox that says, verify you are a human. That's something that Cloudflare does. The last rule is a global managed challenge. If they are not in one of these countries, I block them. It's as simple as that. My audience, the people who are going to do business with me, are primarily in the United States. I've got family in the United Kingdom and Australia. I've allowed New Zealand and Canada as well. If you're in another country, for example, if you're in Russia, I don't want you. If you're in China, I don't want you. And most of the other places, it's not that I think that they're all bad, but there are a lot of bad hackers out there. The Netherlands is full of hackers. Don't know why, it just is. Well, I don't allow anybody who's got an IP address coming from the Netherlands. Can they get around this? Sure, they can use a VPN. And I've got other tools in place that will look for their behavior. But really, I've knocked out a lot of problems before they ever get to my site. And to prove that, we'll take a look at the events. And you can see over here, someone from the United States got skipped. Singapore, France, Singapore again, and Japan, they got challenged. All of these things that I'm looking at, they are basically, I said blocked before. That's not really correct. I also did a managed challenge. There are a lot of bots in the other countries that are out there, and I'm still giving them the option to prove they are human. So the bots that are in all these places, I'm just, they can't handle the managed challenge to prove they are human, so therefore they fail. And this is live as we're recording. And you notice, look at the time difference here. So 15:51, 18 seconds, 15:39. This is pretty close in time here. So all of these different things have happened within just a span of a short period of time. And there are a lot more. I've got 25 pages of this, but this is part of my architecture as well. My idea is for security, you want to start the fight far away from your servers. That doesn't mean that you don't do anything on your server. We'll get into security hardening in a future episode. But the idea is that you don't want to have the majority of the fights on your server where your server has to spend resources fighting it off. That's part of your architecture. That's why I recommend Cloudflare. As I said, all of this is happening on a free plan. It doesn't cost you a penny. So in our next episode, we're going to explore Cloudflare. It's part of the same architecture. It's not something bolted on afterwards. I do want to show you one other thing before we close out. This is something that came up 3 hours ago today when I'm recording this. And this is, again, from the WP Managed Ninja site, and there's the CEO. We are signing our plugin updates now, starting with Fluent Support Pro. Most of the updates that happen from vendors aren't signed. In other words, there's no cryptographic hash that guarantees it's coming from the vendor. And all of their updates are signed now, so every release they publish gets signed with a key that lives offline. So someone can't go and hack into their server. So it's not on their licensing servers, not in our build pipeline, it's not on their content delivery network. And your site checks that signature before WordPress downloads anything. So it's making sure 4 things. The signature is really ours. The package is Fluent Support Pro or whatever other product they come up with that's doing this. And the file hash matches their signature. Any check that stops or the update stops, nothing gets installed. That is, again, another look at architecture. They've found where there are problems in the WordPress community, and they found a solution to it. That's why I love this company so much. This is all part of keeping your site safe. Your security should be part of your architecture plan. All right, so you now know how the 5 questions apply to your own dashboard. Most site owners never run their site through them at all. Working through your own answers is easier with other people doing the same thing. And that's what the community at hub.suburbiapress.com is for. So join today and get some help working through what's actually going on with your own site. You can ask questions. We've got other tutorials that are there. I've got a few courses that are there. There's a free plan, doesn't get as much access. You can join for free. Once you're inside, that's kind of like your trial period. If you decide that you want to see the other groups where we get into more detail, there is an annual fee for that of $129. And then you can put in more detailed information and work with me and other people who are there to help you out. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this. Remember, there's going to be an affiliate link for xCloud in the description below. There will be a link for the Suburbia Press community below. And I hope to see you in there. And of course, back here for the next episode.